You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show. Hey everyone, here in London, England. Excel London, the gargantuan convention center. They actually have a whole food court in the middle of the convention center. So
it's
you
like
can
a
go,
mall.
Yeah, it's like, that's what Kelsey said.
Yeah.
It's like a mall, and like people are basically shopping around. You know, they may not make a buying decision here. They may go home later, and then because they know their shoe size or whatever that is the equivalent of in terms of what's being offered here.
Yeah.
Or they may just buy here.
Yeah.
Depends on the buyer. Anyway, Dan, you have 5 kids?
Yeah, I have 5
We were just
kids.
talking about that. 5 kids?
Yeah. I have 4 boys and I have a little girl who's about a year old now, next week.
Yeah, I was trying to think of a joke about open source and kids, but there's one out there, I'm sure.
Well, with the boys, I feel like we were just scaling up a replica set, and it was like, we got failover, we'll figure it out. But now that we have a girl, it's like, this is a stateful set that we gotta pay attention to this situation.
No joke.
Yeah. My boys won't mind that. They'll laugh. That's fine.
Yeah, they know. They're like, ha.
Yeah, we're scaling up. That's what we're working on. We're a hyperscale organization here, Alex.
And when it gets to 5 kids, like you're saying, the things change as the kids get older.
Oh yeah, you're dealing with different problems. It's a different challenge set. You're moving through a maturity curve,
yes,
if you will.
Yes.
And you're dealing with the challenges as they come, and they're going to be unique and different for each one. Yeah.
Speaking of maturity curves, I don't know where to go with that, but anyway.
Codefresh has matured.
Codefresh
has been acquired.
Yeah, that's how this conversation started, because Dan Garfield, he's VP of open source at Octopus Deploy, but he started Codefresh, a company that acquired by Octopus 10 years ago when he was 30. And I said, what'd you do in your 20s? He said, I was having kids.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, no, it's been quite the journey. I mean, Kubernetes, right? We just did Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes just turned 10 years old. And Codefresh was basically born around the same time. Kubernetes native, focused on building software, deploying software, and there's been certainly a lot of change in the industry. We've seen a lot of companies come and go, and this last year we were acquired by Octopus Deploy, and I've got that new blue octopus on my chest. I'm very happy about. Yeah.
So I've been talking to people about declarative capabilities, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like 10 years later, it almost kind of feels like declarative technologies are like part of the language that people can actually truly understand. A few years ago, that wouldn't be true.
No, that's true. Yeah, everything was imperative, right? And we as an industry have matured that declarative aspect a lot, right? So now we have GitOps. Right, and a lot of people were like, oh, well, I have declarative, so I'm doing GitOps, right? Like I have Terraform, I put it in Git, I run an operation, GitOps, done. And what's really happening now is there's a lot of maturity that's coming in there where with GitOps, people are realizing, okay, I actually need to be using a tool like Argo CD, right? So this is a tool that I help work on. I'm an Argo CD maintainer. And I need a tool like that to actually watch what's happening with my declarative configuration and then see that it's actually being deployed, see if there's drift, deal with those changes, handle that whole operation. And then the challenge is, how do you marry that in with what are traditionally imperative operations like a CI/CD pipeline, right? And so this is where we have some news this week where we launched GitOps Cloud, which is a way of handling environment promotion built on top of Argo CD. And what we do is we decouple that imperative, declarative, domains from each other, where a lot of people, as soon as they start using Argo CD, they're like, okay, how am I going to deploy to staging, then production? Well, I'll take a CI pipeline, I'll connect it to Argo CD, I'll make a Git commit, I'll trigger a synchronization, I'll wait for it to complete. And so they've been rebuilding the same CI/CD pipeline for 20 years, right? They're picking new environments. They're picking a new deployment method, a git commit.
But that's how it should work.
Right, that's how they've been doing it for so long. But what we've launched is this promotion flow tool that is declarative, but it allows you to marry that sort of, I want to go to staging and then production, right? That kind of flow that you do with CI. But it marries it with the declarative where, it's making git commits, but one of the challenges of just extending CI is that the GitOps world is made to be eventually consistent, right? So just making a git commit doesn't mean it's actually deployed yet.
Right.
Right, so I need to wait. Well, what am I waiting for? Well, I've got to wait for it to sync. I've got to wait for the resources to become healthy. And then I've got to wait for them to probably be healthy for a certain period of time. Right, because you've got Kubernetes, you've got resources modifications happening, you've got controllers running. So you might sync, it's healthy, and then there's a controller that's updating, how many pods are supposed to be there, and you suddenly are in a change state. Well, do you want to be running tests then? Like, how do you want to handle that? So our tool really allows you to marry together that sort of promotion flow among any number of Argo CD instances, cluster instances, namespaces. We all define production differently from each other, right?
Those CI/CD environments then become like old trees, don't they? After a while.
Yeah.
And
they get
branch
overgrown.
Off and they get overgrown.
Yeah.
And you need to prune them back a bit. And what you're saying though is that there's certain flows that come in that CI/CD environment that also need to be maintained and evolved. So would they have to do this by hand before?
Yeah, they would be doing it by hand, or I don't even say CI/CD anymore. I say, look, that's a CI workflow, right? So when you want to do CD, that's actually a different task. That has different challenges than CI, right? So the fact that for a long time we've been calling the category CI/CD, which implies that you should be doing CD with a CI pipeline.
Conflation?
It's a conflation, yeah. It's a conflation, yeah. So I really encourage people to think about them differently. And actually GitOps helps with that in a way, because when you start doing GitOps, the first thing you do is you separate your application layer from your infrastructure layer, where it's like, I got my app repo over here, I'm making changes, I'm doing releases, whatever, but I have my configuration repo where okay, now I'm bumping a version, right? And that really improves the reliability experience and the kind of ease of use, but it also introduces challenges. There's a lot of challenges with GitOps that we're helping people solve in Codefresh.
Yeah, I did a fair bit of research and getting ready for this discussion. There's all kinds of issues that can come up. As you start doing more of this advanced type of work, the concept of configuration drift starts to emerge. And, there's a host of other issues, but these problems have a way of getting really bad if you don't take care of that.
Yeah, well, and you have things like there's differences between environments. You might have an application. Let's say I'm shipping a authentication service, right? I'm going to push that to my staging cluster, my staging instance. I'm gonna do some tests there, and then I want to push it to production. And maybe I need to actually push it into 5 different clusters as part of production. And each of those needs to have some nuance of difference because they need to point at different, networking rules or whatever. And so having a promotion tool that supports that nuance and the differences between those environments, boy, that's really useful. That really makes your life a lot easier. So that's part of the flow too of what we're doing with GitOps. But that is an example of challenges with GitOps that people run into for sure.
When do you advise people not to use GitOps?
I think we do sometimes think about maybe components of GitOps that you're not ready to use as an organization. if you think about GitOps, it's a little bit like the 24 hours at Le Mans, right? It's like it requires discipline, team organization. Everything needs to be lined up to make that happen, to do that. So if you're going to do GitOps, your organization needs to be in the mindset of what's in Git is the source of truth. So do you have branch protection turned on? Do you allow anybody to make commit there? How do you do approvals? Because people are used to a world where, oh, stuff might get pushed into the repo, maybe we have to pull it out later, whatever. Well, in GitOps, that's not going to cut it, because what's in the repo should be what's deployed. So that means you need to build discipline around how you do Git flow. So I think we encourage people to mature their organizations in ways that are going to allow them to take advantage of GitOps. And if they're not ready for that, then yeah, it's going to be difficult for them.
And, they face all kinds of issues that they have to be always aware of. Like, I was talking to a company yesterday about, Idera is their name. They developed a very sophisticated container isolation service, right?
Yeah.
And they have to, the biggest question they always get is about performance. And performance, is on every user's mind, right?
Yeah.
So performance matters, become really important in Argo, don't they? I'm curious about how you're continuing to evolve the performance capabilities.
Yeah, we're seeing a scale with Kubernetes now that is fairly foreign to 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh.
Right? So it used to be that if I talked to somebody and they had over 1,000 clusters, it was like, oh, wow, they're really scaling. And now it's more like, oh, you got 10,000 clusters, right? So, and we're regularly talking to people who want to do Argo CD at scale, and they'll cite examples from the community where the people, you can scale Argo CD quite a bit, but there might be things that people are doing that you don't realize the impact that they have on performance. A good example is Intuit, who maintains Argo with us. They have a pretty large-scale monolithic Argo CD architecture, and as part of that, they don't do any manifest generation inside of Argo CD. But most Argo CD users do rely on Argo CD to do that. But because Intuit doesn't do that, they've offloaded a huge chunk of the processing element for Argo CD. And so people will say, oh, well, Intuit has, maybe they have got 5,000 applications. I'm sure I can do it too. Not realizing just how different those workloads are and the kind of bottlenecks they're introducing to their system. So there are definitely challenges that people have there. And one of the ways that we address that is with Codefresh, we have a control plane for Argo. So if you have multiple Argo instances, they roll up into a control plane that has really strong scalability. And that allows you to split up Argo instances so that they don't have to do as much. And you also...
Is that an instance per cluster approach, or is that something
It could
else?
be per cluster. It could be per region.
Yeah.
It could be per, production level. But that allows Argo to have a smaller blast radius if you have an issue, right? It's like, I'm having an issue in dev, but I can still update production. Whereas when you're using a fully monolithic Argo, okay, if there's an issue with Argo, maybe I can't update production anymore. Okay, I don't want to be in that situation, right? I want to have more resiliency, more failover. So that's where something like a control plane really takes off the sharp edges of running lots of Argo instances.
What did you set up in your control plane? What did you develop?
So with the control plane, we developed essentially an agent that you can install with your Argo CD instance that's going to do an egress only kind of networking setup so that it can report metadata information. But it's a zero trust control plane, so it doesn't actually have access to do any write operations. Those things are going to happen on your infrastructure. It's only reporting that metadata. And then if I, as a user, am doing something, typically it's directly against Git. So this is a place where we've changed the permission model to be built around Git and what Argo is doing, so that the control plane doesn't really need permissions. It doesn't really have any trust. So that allows you to have, to use it in a lot more situations where, maybe you'd have to self-host that in the past, and now it's easier to offload into somebody else, like a SaaS.
Yeah, like all these issues must be emerging quite rapidly for users these days, like you're saying, because you might be a company that has 1 or 2 clusters, right?
Yeah.
And you run it on a managed service, but then suddenly your development team says, "Oh, we wanted to start developing microservices."
Yeah.
So now you have a whole new level of complexity, because now it's like, well, it's not just like adding, adding microservices requires observability.
Yeah.
It requires, lots of other capabilities. So from what I'm hearing you're saying is that customers are starting to increase the number of clusters, for instance.
Yeah.
I expect that's true.
Yeah, we see that more often, yeah.
And that brings in a whole nother level of scaling challenges for them. And some are around performance. There must also be some other trade-offs, like, rollback access control, right? Like, how do you think about
that?
No,
the authentication is one issue. The user management was one issue. But even let me give you something like even way more basic. Let's say I've got 10,000 clusters all over the world, and I have a large amount of manifests to pull. When I push an update and all of these clusters are pointed at the same Git server, my Git server API is getting tapped out. I'm doing a denial of service attack on Git to make this happen, right? So those are the kinds of challenges that are a little bit on the frontier, where those are starting to happen, this last year, where we didn't see those really 5 years ago. So that's something that's familiar to people that remember the Puppet days, right? The denial of service attack on your artifact repository was something that used to happen, right? So Artifactory has built features around that to mitigate that. But with Git, those things are really emergent still, right? So there's a maturity that's happening there.
It's emergent in terms of in terms of what again?
Of both the challenge of scaling to that level and also the solutions to meet those things.
Oh, so people are needing to really experiment with different solutions. You must have had to go through that.
Oh yeah. No, we've gone through, and this is a place where I think you're probably familiar, and people are familiar with. Codefresh put out the GitOps training certification for Argo, where we set up a ton of those best practices, because we just work with a ton of companies that are hitting tons of different situations, and so we've been developing these best practices around avoiding things like putting your environments in different branches, because it makes your promotion life a lot more difficult. There's just a million little things like that. There's all of these choices. Going back to your tree analogy with CI/CD, there's all these choices that people are making with GitOps and software delivery, where they don't realize that they're making those choices because that's how they used to do it before Kubernetes. And those choices have an impact on their cloud native software delivery. So if they're still doing something because that's the way they did it before Kubernetes, that may not be the way to do it anymore. And I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of people, when they generate manifests, they say, okay, I want to inject secrets into those manifests. And with Argo CD 3.0, we actually came out with a recommendation and said, we strongly advise you don't do that, because you are putting your secrets into manifests that are going to be in plain text in Kubernetes. You don't want to do that. Let's use secrets in Kubernetes. They're designed for it. And there are all of these architectural considerations for different applications where they're designed not to work with that secret model yet, because they're still doing it the way they would have done in the past. And in the past, your configuration didn't exist on your deployment environment, right? In plain text and etcd. It was just, that was what the configuration was. But now it's stored in etcd. It's in the Kubernetes API. I can access it. Don't put a secret in there in plain text, right? Use the secrets object to do it. So there's a million things like that where a lot of those things we put into our GitOps training certification that you're just bringing maybe a little bit of an old world mindset into cloud native, and it's going to cause problems for you.
Yeah.
The phrase we use is foot guns. There's foot guns all over the place. Things that will shoot you in the foot, if you're not paying attention, and you're just picking it up in de facto, thinking that you're going to do it the way you used to do it. And you really need to take the approach of, okay, how do you do GitOps? What does that mean? What are the implications? And it's good to talk to people who have done it before, and get their advice so that you can avoid a lot of those pitfalls.
Yeah, you're gonna have pitfalls no matter what. But you just want to avoid the serious pitfalls.
Yeah, disarm the foot guns.
Yeah.
Before they can go off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we end on that note? Dan, thanks a lot for taking some time.
Thank you, Alex. It's always fun to hang out with the new stack.
Appreciate it.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.